I will just welcome everybody this morning. Thank you so much for coming. I'm going to just walk you through the agenda briefly and mention a couple of ground rules. So, first of all, if everybody can mute themselves, I know we're all used to these rules at this stage, but it's worth repeating. So if everybody can just keep muted unless you're presenting or acting on the panel. We'll be we're happy to take questions, comments in the chat during the event at any point. And also during the panel discussion, that is the way that we will take questions. So if you've got any questions for our panelists during the panel discussion, if you can enter them into the chat box at that point, and the chair of the panel discussion will moderate them. So we're starting off proceedings with a brief overview of QQI's 10-year anniversary planned programme of events for next year, which my colleague Peter Cullen, our Head of Research and Innovation, will take you through briefly. We're following that up with an overview or three perspectives on micro-credentials and professional education. We're hoping, unfortunately, Dr. Ashley Jones is ill and is unable to present, but Klaus Weil, Dr. Klaus Weil, the President of Professions Australia, is hoping to join us and to present Ashley's piece. Dr. Lynn Ramsey will be presenting. Lynn is the Micro-Credentials Project Lead from the Irish Universities Association, and she'll be giving us an update on the Micro-Credentials project and activity ongoing in the Irish university sector. And Mary Lyons, Director of Enterprise Employees and Skills from Solus, will give us an overview of her engagement with industry and the skills agenda and how that's fed into the development of micro-credentials. Dr. Alison Farrell is here to give an update on the National Forum's Next Steps project, which is looking at post-pandemic what we all need to consider going into the future and beyond the pandemic. And then we'll have a short conversation starter, which is looking at professional and academic education, both discrete responsibilities and functions and overlapping activities, and of professional bodies and HEIs, and how I suppose both parties can work better together to ensure better collaboration to the benefit of future professionals. Finally, we'll have a panel discussion on placements and work-based learning, and we will have Bronwyn Maloney, Director of Quality from UCD, Ronan O'Loughlin, Director of Education and Training from Chartered Accountants Ireland, Carolyn Donoghue, Director of Education Policy and Standards from NMBI, and Dr. Brian Maguire, Director of Institutional Quality Assurance and Learner Pathways with QQI. We will close by asking you for your ideas for our programme of events in 2022, and we will be surveying you for your ideas on areas that would be of interest to discuss and consider in 2022. So I will hand over then at this point to Dr. Peter Cullen to talk about QQI's plans for next year, our 10th anniversary. Thanks, Peter.
Thanks, Mairead. Briefly, QQI is 10 years old next year, and we're planning, I think, an exciting series of events to celebrate and reflect on the journey that our partners and we have taken since 2012 and what all that means for the future. Among these events will be one that brings together diverse national and international perspectives on the importance of taught major award programs. It's worth reflecting that most higher education institutions spend a significant fraction of their formative years pursuing 3, 4, or 5-year programs. Those programs mediate much of their interaction with their institution, with their education. It's where their disciplinary formation occurs. It's where their inculcation into the academic or professional community often begins. It is difficult, frankly, to overstate the importance of the program to the quality of their educational experience. Of course, there's many different ways of organizing or realizing programs. They can range from the highly prescribed, where the whole cohort of students receives essentially the same formation, to the highly individualized, where each individual in effect co-creates their own program. But I think it's fair to say that effective programs tend to be distinguished by one thing, and that is they are more than the sum of their parts. They are more than just an aggregation of modules or elements. The event we are planning will be an opportunity to take a little time out to reflect on your journey with programs, to look at current trends with inputs from high-profile national and international authorities. We think this event will be of interest to higher education institutions, to professional bodies, and to many other people who have an interest in higher education formation. We will be in contact with you early in the new year with further information about this event and about the other events we're planning for our 10th anniversary in 2012. That's it for me.
Thanks a million, Peter. So with that, we will kick off our micro-credentials and professional education segment. And I'm delighted to see Dr. Klaus Feil, the president of the Australian Council of Professions, in the virtual room. Klaus, would you be happy to kick us off?
Yes, I can try. I am, and thank you for indulging us today from down under. Making it slightly a little bit more complicated is having to come in at the last minute for Dr. Jones, who's unfortunately, sadly not available for us today. Certainly, we'll try our best. My colleague at the Australian Council of Professions, Lynette Harris, who's also specialist in work integrating her learning, I hope will join us shortly if she's not already online. But certainly, where do I start? Work integrated learning, of course, has been a very important issue in the last sort of nearly 2 years with the pandemic. Obviously, we know as professions and as the peak body of the professions in our country, and we represent about 1 million professionals all over Australia, accountants, medical professionals, engineers, IT professionals, etc., many of which placements and work integrated learning and gaining experience at the actual coalface and work phase is an important part of basically their education to become, competent graduates. And certainly that's been a real challenge, of course, in the last couple of years, because with lockdowns and restrictions, etc., just as well as we do down under, it's been a trying time. Interestingly, about March, last year, our Minister of Education contacted us and asked us if we could actually help with putting together some guidelines for the higher education sector regarding teaching, learning, placements, assessment, and also mobility during the pandemic. And we were able to rise to the occasion as the Australian Council of Professions. We've done some similar work before in 2016 to actually put down some, if you like, basic guidelines for the accreditation of higher education courses. And I believe that QQI has used some of our work and some of our learnings and experience for your own standards for Ireland, which of course we are very delighted about, that you can share and utilise maybe some of our learnings. So based on that track record in March, April last year, we pulled together, if you like, an alliance of the higher education sector, being all the public universities, about 40 of them, independent universities through their peak body, and also got the endorsement ultimately of these joint guidelines from, if you like, the Australian equivalent of QQI, being TEXA, the Tertiary Education Quality Organisation, and also endorsement by the Minister of Education at the time, who said, this is some really good work that the Australian Council of Professions have done. Go to the website and download the guidelines, which is sort of a little bit unusual when a minister says that. We were quite delighted about that. So that was probably where the journey started. And I think the work has been, I think, really spread around with many organisations who've all done their bit to ensure the continuation of quality education of professionals during these difficult times. Obviously, last year we thought that would be quite quickly, into a post-COVID phase, and of course now we know at the end of 2021 that's not the case, and I think we're going to see a lot of 2022 being quite similar as we've had this year, and that's not a very, I suppose, enlightening prospect, but I think it shows how important the work was that we did in April, May last year to set down some guidelines for operating effectively and efficiently and maintaining the quality during difficult and challenging times. So that's probably one aspect there. In more recent times, our Ministry of Education has put out a review of the work integrated learning, and I was hoping that maybe Lynette can pitch in and talk a little bit about that. But if she is, and unfortunately I can't see her at the moment because of my slightly challenged situation at the moment. So if I could get a nod or a comment from you, Myred, where we might go from here.
Yeah, Klaus, Lynette is not actually here. We do have Ashley's slides, if that would be helpful, that we could share, if you're happy to make a few comments on them. I know you're
yeah, absolutely, please. If you would do that, that would be great. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Klaus. Just 1 second, I have them ready to go. Here we go. So I'm just going to put the slideshow on from the beginning, and you can just shout when I need to move on, forward or back.
Well, yes, of course. And, if we look at the moment at the micro-credentials topic, which is a little bit integrated into that, because both work-integrated learning at the workplace and micro-credentials, or CPD, are there to ensure ongoing and continuing practical education of professionals. So basically, one of the things we've been looking at is, how micro-credentials can actually uphold the standards for CPD or CPE, which I think is essential to being a professional. It's not only having, certain graduate attributes on graduation and entry into a professional association maybe, but also maintaining that level of education and knowledge. So basically, obviously, micro-credentials can actually, I suppose, have a positive effect, and in some cases take the place of CPD, CPE, because they do have a capability framework because of their more formal approach. Because usually micro-credentials come out of the tertiary education sector, that basically. So that underpinning of a methodology and rigorous approach, underpins consistent and ethical standards. Also, because of the, I suppose, background of micro-credentials in academia, we actually find often there's common ontologies, common languages that are valid across the various micro-credentials. And of course, that's really important when you start looking at some of the quality aspects, because we've seen, and I'm wondering what it's like in Ireland, but certainly in Australia, we've seen, should I say, micro-credentials sprouting like mushrooms after rain, because often even the educated professional public are a bit confused and saying, well, which micro-credential is actually worthwhile, the money and the time spent into it. So obviously quality of micro-credentials is really important. And obviously in many cases, CPD, CP offerings will actually be linked back into higher level award courses, grad dips, grad certs, whatever. There is, as you know, the long-standing hope of some people that all you need these days for a PhD is a stack, a very big stack, of course, of micro-credentials, but as we all know, it doesn't quite work like that. So maybe on to the next slide, Marit, please. Okay, so then basically, if we go a little bit more deeply into CPD, CPE, obviously, we need capability frameworks to basically set the standards across, professional systems at the various levels to make sure that the things are comparable, because the audience is actually quite broad. We're talking here from emerge people at the very beginning of their careers to probably fairly mature professionals who are at C-suite level, or maybe even being awarded a fellow of their discipline. So important to have consistent frameworks of capability. And also, you need then, of course, the scientific underpinning, and there's a couple of things that Ash mentions here, which I won't go into because that's really her area of speciality. So maybe next slide, please, Byron. Thank you. So, of course, what we've found with some of the initial work we've done, with looking at how can we standardize CPD, CPE using a micro-credential approach. Obviously, we need a common language. We need to deploy a common language. We have clearly defined criteria and multiple levels of achievement. So at the moment, and this is a development which we might be able to report at an event next year, Karina, Myred, we're about to launch our first micro-credential, which happens to be on professionalism and ethics. And we have 3 levels of achievement that is awarded for that micro-credential. And obviously, with that granularity, that allows professional associations to really clearly, signpost or define how the expectation is that professionals achieve to maintain their professional standing, because it is important to clearly define the standards against your measuring the maintaining of one's professional knowledge, which of course is the fundamental purpose of CPD, CPE schemes. And of course, things need to be measurable. They need to be transparent. They need to be, you may be able to replicate them, just to ensure, the fairness of any CPD, CPE approach, which of course then leads to the maintenance of one's professional standing. Thank you, Maria. Okay, so we've gained some experience in Australia in some area with some continuing professional educational development units in professional ethics. So our National Engineering Association, Engineers Australia, Australian Computer Society, and the Chartered Accountants Australia and New Zealand all have units of learning in professional ethics. Another area which is becoming increasingly relevant is the area of diversity, equity, and inclusion. While that may be, and I have to be careful here with my wording, but maybe in times past it was seen as a nice to have, there's now hard evidence, and I'm an economist by background, that the return on shareholder funds is higher if an organization deploys broad-based diversity and inclusion in rank and file. So directors of organizations who don't provide, if you like, or in the diversity and implementation of inclusive approaches in their organizations could be seen as negligent to their shareholders if they don't assess that properly. So as an underpinning to that, if you then have some CPD or micro-credential in that area, that's very helpful and is great evidence to show that the leaders of an organization have taken that issue seriously and assessed it competently. And of course, we all know data protection, security, all that stuff is, of course, most important, because one of the biggest threats to organizations today is, if you like, hacking and nefarious, IT activities. Thank you, Morid. Next. So we're positing that maybe the traditional continued professional education development approaches in professional associations might progress or mature towards a formally awarded higher education courses and mini courses, of course, at the granularity level of micro-credentials. So, for instance, we have the Australian Qualifications Framework, and maybe, Karina, or could you just maybe translate that to the Irish equivalent for the audience?
Yeah, that would be the National Framework of Qualifications, the NFQ, of which QQI is custodian. And Klaus, I have to tell you, Klaus, you have 2 more minutes. I'm sorry to be strict with time, because we're so lucky to have you speaking.
That's fine. That's no problem at all. So basically, micro-credentials have been mapped in the Australian qualification framework, which is the equivalent. So that's part of also, again, making the achievement level transparent. So next slide, please. Looks like we're done. So maybe any questions or any final comments, please, maybe from the chairs of the session for me.
What we might do is we'll move on to the next presentation. I think Dr. Lynn Ramsey is next, and we can take questions then at the end of the session. If anybody would like to enter.
I might not be available due to the sort of ad hoc circumstances, so I don't know if either of you have a question for me. Otherwise, I will have to sort of commend you to the remainder of the program.
Yeah, no, I think we'll let you go, Klaus, and thank you so much for stepping in. You're very good. What we'll do is we'll ask Ashley to record her slides, and we can circulate them to colleagues when she's feeling a little bit better. And we'll keep in touch. There's a few other bits and pieces that we were going to get updates on, but we can circulate them to colleagues in the meeting next. So thank you so much for accommodating us. You're very good.
And thank you so much for both of you presenting at our recent event in Australia. And, I think it's really heartening to see the collaboration between Australia and Ireland in these really important matters. So thank you very much. And thank you to the audience for your patience with me today.
Thanks so much, Klaus. Talk to you soon. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
So, Lynn, you're ready to go. That's brilliant. So Dr. Lynn Ramsey, project lead on the micro-credentials project from the IUA, will now present. Thanks, Lynn.
Thank you very much, Mairead, and thanks to QQI for the kind invitation to join in the session tomorrow. Really interested in Klaus's presentation there, and I was making some notes as he was talking. There's a lot of synergies in terms of that Australian experience and our experience here in the microcreds project. So thanks again. I have the opportunity now today to share some insights from our microcreds project. This is one of the HCI Human Capital Initiative funded projects. Colleagues around the table will probably be fairly familiar with the HCI, but its monies derived from the National Training Fund, and call went out, filtered through the Higher Education Authority, looking for projects that would really speak to agility and flexibility in terms of what we do in higher education, would speak to a dynamic engagement with enterprise. And colleagues in the IUA and university colleagues pulled together this really exciting project. So it's a 5-year project for 12.3 million, and we're working with 7 of our university partners, and you'll see them all there on the slide. So University College Dublin, UCC, the University of Limerick, Trinity College Dublin, NUI Galway, Maynooth University and DCU. And I think that range of universities and the depth of experience and research capacity and depth of different partnerships with industry really speak to the quality and the base in which this project is working. So we have 4 strands which are interconnected and frame our project. The first is to develop a national framework for micro-credentials. The second is to think about how we might engage with enterprise in a dynamic and sustainable and evidence way. And I'll share with you today our approaches to what that piloting engagement might look like at the collective level. And obviously our universities are working in particular ways with their own enterprise partners in addition to that. The third strand is the development of a digital platform, which will show all learners, show enterprise the suite of micro-credentials which are available, and the platform will be linked to a digital credentialing solution, so that learners who undertake the micro-credentials will be able to port them within their digital rucksack, and we're delighted to be working with Europass as an early adopter. And then the final strand, and perhaps the most important strand of all, is that our university partners are developing a range of micro-credentials, and even listening to Klaus today and talking about some of the micro-credentials developing in the Australian context from the PSRB side of the house, we're already seeing similar micro-credentials developed from some of our partners, so I might touch on some of them today. So I thought it might be interesting for this group to get a sense of 3 particular areas. So one is that how we're working in terms of prioritisation and governance. The second is to really describe the approach that we're taking. We're looking at an iterative pilot approach. This is a 5-year project, and whilst micro-credentials as a terminology might be new, we know very well that the idea of a small course is not new, but us working together as a collective across 7 universities absolutely is new. So we'll talk through what that piloted approach is like. And then finally, I might touch on what the enterprise collaboration looks like, because I think that's particularly maybe of interest to this group today. So we're very lucky, I think, in many ways that this project sits at the highest level within our universities. There's really strong strategic commitment right up to the level of presidents. You can see in the university strategic plans a calling out of that flexibility in terms of lifelong learning. Indeed, some of the universities mention micro-credentials in their strategic planning. So it really goes to the heart of how universities are thinking about engagement with professionals, enterprise, civil society and public sector bodies on a lifelong and life-wide basis. As a collective, we report ultimately into our registrars, and I think that's really important in terms of quality assurance, boundaries and principles. We have a steering group which is comprised of representatives from each of our universities at a very senior level. And then crucially, we have 7 full-time project leads in each of our universities, and I'll introduce the project leads to you now shortly. We have an enterprise advisory group, and I'll introduce you to some of our enterprise advisory group members. And then we have a number of ad hoc groups, which we're lucky to be able to reach out to as we need. So we have a senior technical leads group who we're working with in terms of the scoping of our discovery portal. We also have a comms group bringing together IUA comms staff, comms staff in the universities, and also our specialists from the universities. So these are our project leads. Some of colleagues here will be very familiar with the project leads, but maybe not everyone. I know some of them are on the call today. So we have project leads in each of the 7 universities, and all working full-time, but all from very different backgrounds, which I think is very interesting. So, for example, Circa McCahey would have come from the career guidance side of the house in UCD. Mags Ireland, they're working through the medical faculty in UCC, and so on. A real difference in backgrounds and experiences, and I think that shows a strength in terms of the diversity of thinking that we are able to leverage through the project. And then our Enterprise Advisory Group is a fantastic body because they're a great resource for us to sense check direction of travel, and also to communicate back at key stages of the project through all of their stakeholders. Tony Donoghue chairs, and that's some of our membership there. So you can see we've got a range of companies, collective groups, representative of large corporations and also some SMEs. So we're working in a piloted way on the project. So we've kicked off an initial pilot phase Q2 this year. And we're moving now to an interim review of that pilot phase just this month of December. There's kind of 4 elements to our initial pilot: a working definition, core values, the constitutive elements of the micro-credentials, and what would be similar to the common diploma supplement. That 4th element we'll start to work on from 2022. So we've been paralleling or shadowing the working definition of the European Commission. And for many of you on this call, this will be very familiar, but I was struck when Klaus was talking that a lot of what he was describing was really similar to this working definition. Of course, the European Commission has gone out to consultation on the micro-credentials, and the recommendation to Council will follow this month, and that travel through the French presidency or the Czech presidency. We're not expecting the definition to be substantially different from this one. So it talks about that proof of learning outcome that a learner has acquired following a short learning experience, and the learning outcomes assessed against transparent standards. So just listening to Klaus there, very similar to some of the direction of travel in Australia. Our work is centred around these core values, and at the heart of those is leadership in lifelong learning. And what's interesting about the university work are some of those flanking values. So we talk about the dynamic enterprise collaboration that I'll go into in more detail. Excellence and innovation, predicated on research-led micro-credentials, looking at flexibility and agility, but underpinned by robust quality assurance, which is an interesting space and an important space. Work that's entirely learner focused. So we are looking particularly at learners who are already working by and large, who are looking to upskill, reskill, or shift careers. So that's a very similar space to the space that Klaus was describing. We're mirroring inclusive approaches at every stage of our work. And the micro-credentials are not there for their own benefit. They're really they're designed to address in a flexible way economic and societal challenges. So with our pilot phase, and bear in mind we're doing an interim review, we've been working within this space. So we're looking at the credit levels map to levels 7 to 10 on the National Framework of Qualifications. We're looking across a sliding scale of 1 to 30 ECTS, and of course robust quality assurance underpinning the work at every stage. It's our intention that we will work with our partners to develop pathways so that micro-credentials can be stacked towards larger awards. It's absolutely not, as Klaus described, a bag of credits that you can say, well, let's shake that up and we'll translate that into any award. There has to be integrity in terms of the larger awards that the micro-credentials are stacked into, but it does give learners that flexibility to learn at their own pace, in their own time, and in balance with their home and life commitments. We'll be using the Bologna tools and recognition frameworks as we move, of course. And then moving finally to the last phase of our work, that's that engagement with enterprise. So we have a concept called Microcreds Innovate, which we're piloting, and that's using established data on skills gaps to understand how can we work together as universities and as enterprise to co-design micro-credentials that respond to these big enterprise and societal challenges. So there are 3 micro-credential phases that we're looking at. The first Microcreds Innovate is focused on zero carbon, and that's building out on the EGFSN report, and our next 2 are in digital transformation and the SME space. So I think there's a lot of very interesting micro-credentials in that zero carbon space that speak to the regulatory requirements, say for PSRBs, no more than those broader micro-credentials we see emerging. We have a really nice micro-credential coming out from UCC on EDI, just launched yesterday, in fact. So there's micro-credentials that cut across all of the PSRBs, but there's also discipline-specific ones, and I'm conscious of your time, Mairead, so I would just end there. Happy to take any conversations and questions. Please follow us on all the social channels, and that's my contact details, and also the contact details of Dr. Emma Francis, who's our project officer. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Lynn, for that whistle-stop tour through the microcreds project. So I'm going to move on before we take questions or any comments to Mary Lyons, who from Solace, and I think Kiva is going to share Mary's slides. So Mary's going to talk about engagement with industry and the skills agenda in the development of micro-credentials. Thanks a million, Mary.
Good morning, everyone. Delighted to be here. Thank you very much for the invitation to join the meeting. As was said, I work on enterprise, employees and skills areas within Solace. So I have a strategic remit in relation to the micro-qualifications innovation, which has been highlighted in the recent developed further education and training strategy. If you'd like to move on to the next slide, that'd be great. Thank you. So very much enshrined in that strategy is the commitment to embrace a flexible way of working, particularly in relation to the needs of people who are served by further education and training. And as you will know, we're talking about people who may have dropped out of school early. They may be returning to the educational sphere after work or home commitments. They may have not really had the opportunity to develop literacy or numeracy skills, and a wide range of learner profile really, and we would serve over 300,000 people every year. But about 3 years ago, it was decided to take a particular focus, in addition to all of that responsibility, to actually look at the cohort of people who were working and had, I suppose, identified needs to upskill and reskill in order to maintain employment, to enhance their employment prospects, and to be able to avail of emerging opportunities in their careers, but also to sustain their families and livelihoods. And we developed a policy initiative called Skills to Advance. So in the strategy, there's very much a commitment to positioning education and training boards as a key resource for enterprise to serve those people who are particularly hard to reach. All the research shows that they're particularly difficult to reach, and they're the least likely to be offered enhanced career development opportunities by their employers, and they're the least likely to seek those opportunities themselves. So our task is quoting, and we are very much working with a whole range of partners in this particular need in the economy, but in society as well. So and again, the focus on micro-qualifications is very much highlighted in the further education training strategy as a way of making access to those upskilling and reskilling opportunities that Lynn, and previous speakers was talking about, to make them more accessible, more flexibly available, and more inviting for people who, in most cases, don't even know that they need that particular opportunity to upskill. And again, we're very much working within the European approach, which largely to date has focused on higher education, but recently obviously is carrying out research and developing themes in relation to further education training, or working alongside that as a national funding authority for further education and training. So moving on then to the next slide, I just want to talk to you about the project that we developed. In terms of our commitment to employees and enterprise, we developed a policy called Skills to Advance in conjunction with the Department of Education at the time and a whole wide range of stakeholders in the enterprise arena. And this has been rolled out over the last 2.5 years. We have developed over 25,000 people now to date through that policy, and we're expanding it in the coming year again. But part of that policy is a collaboration fund. It's called an Innovation Through Collaboration Fund, and the whole focus of that is to provide a platform for education training boards around the country to partner with other institutions, including higher education, technology companies, sectoral bodies and agencies, and in particular enterprise, to ensure that they are continually developing agile and flexible opportunities for enterprise and for employees. And we've been very successful. We've funded 10 key projects to date, and we'll be funding another 3 in the next, will be announced shortly. So it's an ongoing commitment to innovation in the further education and training sector to the benefit of enterprise and employees. And within that, then, we identified the opportunity to develop a micro qualifications project. We're calling it qualifications very decidedly because it's very important that the qualifications offered are seen by the employees and the employers themselves to fit within the National Framework of Qualifications, to be seen as recognised qualifications, because the market in terms of micro-credentials is quite complex, particularly if you're a worker, if you're actually employed. There's a whole range of offers available, and often quite difficult to discern whether they offer a pathway or not in terms of future progression, which is key to us in terms of our work in Solace, investing in that continual development of the individual, the enterprise, and the community and the region. So we have launched a pilot and a pre-pilot with the Education Training Boards. There's 16 of them around the country, and we have really good partnership with QQI in this respect in developing the methodology and the documentation, the framework in relation to pursuing the project. And so we're well advanced now, where we have we have one proposal already in progress, and we have 3 more going forward shortly to within the PAC process. And I just outlined to you now on the next slide how we're doing that. So as I said, we're working through the Skills to Advance policy. So education training boards are making available upskilling opportunities, on a daily basis. But what we've done through the innovation and through collaboration process, we've developed a whole lot of new ways, new methodologies, based on very much a research approach to working with enterprise to identify their needs. So very much an evidence-based approach to identify what are the gaps in the existing training offers and qualifications available nationally and internationally in emerging areas such as, for example, advanced manufacturing, and I'll just take fish farming as a particularly important aspect of our marine industry. So we have done rigorous analysis with partners to identify the gaps, very much reaching out to industry, working through the regional skills fora and representative bodies like ISME and Small Firms Association, and then sectoral bodies to assemble that particular evidence to identify where we should focus our efforts, and hence the 4 areas we've started with, as a showcase in terms of what the need is and how we propose to approach it. So again, moving on to the next slide, thank you. So the approach we're adopting is that we want very much to start with the learner, hence the emphasis on finding the evidence in terms of the skills gaps. But we do that, the ETBs work using survey research, but also personal contact interviews and a methodology called skills needs analysis to actually work with individuals and companies to identify those needs. Then as we set up a working structure whereby we would have a steering group, much like Lynn explained, in terms of the governance and infrastructure, where we have senior further education training directors who head up their function in relation to serving their communities through further education training within the Education Training Board. So they participate in the working group structure, and then we set up both program design groups and promotions groups, because we found that due to the lack of awareness among individuals and enterprises of their needs, it's really important that we start ab initio in identifying how we can collaborate with our strategic partners to reach out and to communicate and to elicit engagement and then traction to actually embrace the learning opportunities and the micro qualifications in this case. The delivery methodology is very flexible and can be suited very much to individuals and to companies. And as I said, we're taking a very inclusive approach in that we're trying to reach those people who have a level 5 or below qualification in the workforce. However, we do cater for graduates. Many graduates are working in areas that are low skilled and need progression pathways, which we can offer through further education training to enable them to develop a career. And then, of course, as I said, micro qualifications are a key to enhancing access and flexibility, because they offer the opportunity of incremental learning within the National Framework Qualifications. So they offer both the accessibility but also the recognition that people who are working in low-skilled areas and who are trying to enhance their qualifications and their career prospects and progress, to higher level qualifications, many of them do progress into the higher education sphere, to ensure that they have access to qualifications which are valued nationally and internationally, to give that credibility to the micro training that we are developing. So again, moving on, thank you very much. To the next slide. So in terms of how we're engaging with industry, as I said, our focus is on the individual, but to work with the individual, we need to really develop our approach to working with enterprise to reach those people who normally aren't offered opportunities to upskill and reskill. And as I said, we've developed a methodology whereby 4 different sectoral areas or occupational areas, and we've identified, like Lynn, we've identified 3 key areas at the moment that we're working on. All of them are related to SMEs, because that's a particular focus in terms of the majority of people that we would cater for are working within those range of companies, but also to make up the vast majority of Irish industry. So we have identified, again, through our research, our labour market unit in Solace, carries out a wide range of research on behalf of the National Training Fund, the Expert Skills Group, and underpins our planning for further education training. So we have identified, as in higher education, that digital and green are the 2 priority areas. And then we have the 3rd area we call emerging areas, which are very sectorally focused. I give the instance of advanced manufacturing and the marine industry as 2 areas there that we've identified. So it's very much a ground-up approach where the ETBs are very close to industry in their region, close to their communities, and can can scan the environment and feed up information to us, as well as the national research that is available to us as well through various resources, as I said. But then independently of that, we carry out our own research related to our specific micro-qualification projects. And we do that in conjunction with 6 or 7 ETBs would be represented on each working group. And we then start to work with them to develop contacts with companies in their regions, and again supported by specialist agencies such as the Environmental Protection Agency or other sectoral agencies which are brought onto the group or welcomed on as partners to inform our approach and our progress with the pilots. So this methodology has been very successful to date. As I said, it's about trying to bring together the local knowledge, formalised through research and engagement with local industry, and then blending that with national engagement by myself and my team and colleagues with a whole range, at this stage I think over 30 enterprise stakeholders on the various groups, and weaving together the knowledge base and the data from the 2 sources to ensure that we have a holistic perspective on not just what the needs are, but how we might approach them, and where we can blend with existing provision and where there's need for innovation and development, having scanned nationally and internationally to reach out to prospective partners. So it's a process in development, but it's very much building on the work we've done over the last number of years through Skills to Advance, where we create an infrastructure for working with industry. There are teams in every ETB who are specifically working on serving enterprise and employees. And as I said, we've conducted, just to link with our earlier speaker from Australia, in a previous role as Director of Professional Development for the 10,000 people who work in the sector, we would have launched specific dedicated training for those team members to ensure that they were equipped to reach out to industry and to be able to, I suppose, consider from the industry standpoint or from the employee standpoint how education can serve them. So that was a really big part of our work in trying to pivot the perspective of the provider or the developer to really embrace the perspective of the individual or organisation or enterprise, which could really benefit from further education and training services.
Mary, I'm really sorry to rush you, but I know Alison she needs to leave at 10, so I'm going to have to stop you there. Thank you so much I know there are questions in the chat. We will come back to them after Dr. Alison Farrell, who's going to speak briefly about the National Forum's Next Step project. So I'll come back to Mary and Lynn after Alison's piece. Thanks a million.
Thanks, Marie. I'm just going to share my screen now, and I have I promised that I will stick to time for you. Okay, I'm just going to put it into the. So thank you very much for inviting me here to talk about the Next Steps project. And what I'm really going to do is point you to the Next Steps outputs that we have on our website and share just a very few of our findings today. And say that we're very happy to follow up with anybody if they want to hear more about the project. So the Next Steps project was answering one question, and it's a partnership project, and our question was, in the context of COVID-19, what have we learned and what does it mean for the future of teaching and learning in Irish higher education? So we worked on this question together from March until November. We have 15 partners, and I had a little look through the participants. I see that lots of our partners are here this morning, so that's really nice. And our outputs were, we had three outputs really. We have a partner report, and that's the image there that you can see the cover of the report. We had 20 insights, so these are very short, concise documents that the partners produced. I know QQI produced 2 of those insights for us. And we produced a mini documentary that was included in the launch of the project. So I know when I was looking in the team space, when I was the observer, my screen was quite small, so I imagine this might be quite small, but just to give you a sense of the range of partners, you can see the logos of the partners there, and you can also get a sense of the range of the project in that our partners either had existing data that they contributed to the project, or they engaged in new research. And so this gave us an enormous breadth of work, and it gave us a very large scope, range of perspectives. And we believe that this is a unique project. We don't believe that this has happened anywhere else. We haven't heard of it happening anywhere else globally. So we're very fortunate that we could work together to come up with this, these outputs. I'm going to share some of the key messages, and these I had drawn from the report. If you have a chance to look at the report, you'll see elaboration on these messages and on the recommendations, and you'll also see items that I haven't included. But I deliberately pulled out the things that I thought would be most appropriate for this audience, and it's actually really reassuring to hear the similarity in the themes that have been considered this morning. So just, I know that Klaus mentioned particularly equity, diversity and inclusion. That came out so strongly in our work, and all of the partners saw this as an essential element going forward. We also saw a very strong emphasis on collaboration and partnership. And I'm just thinking of the things that Mary said around looking at collaborative approaches. Also where Mary mentioned evidence-based, that has come out really strongly in the work, that we don't want to base our work on anecdote. We want to draw from research. We want to do work like the Next Steps. We want to have the evidence to back up our hunches or what we feel is happening on the ground, so that we can better understand it and we can plan in more coherent ways. I suppose another element that came up was around I'm thinking about the core values that Lynn mentioned, and having leadership as the centerpiece. And this came out very strongly. Distributed leadership indeed came out very strongly in the Next Steps report. And because I suppose one of the emphases this morning is looking at the world of work, this came out as a very strong message, that it was digitally infused and that it requires a commitment to lifelong learning. So not just for students or potential prospective students, but also for staff, that we constantly need to be learning. That engagement that Klaus mentioned with CPD is really important for colleagues working within the sector as well. Some of the specific things that came up were around the changing environment, so the change in learning and teaching environments, how, where and how we learn is changing, and that has implications for capital spending and related matters. And then all of these things ripple out to pedagogy, what happens in the classroom, the variety in terms of the experiences that our students have, including work integrated learning, everything as Mary mentioned around digital. We know from that digital is very much the spine almost of what we're doing now, and that it's a thread in all our work. And the final point I would say is that we need, in our work together, which was hugely empowering and very rich because of its diversity, we really learned that we need to continue to investigate the space together. It was very interesting to see the different perspectives and the emphases that people have depending on their particular setting. So I'm going to share the links. I'll share the slides with you, Mairead, and please feel free to share them with colleagues this morning. And within the slides, then you'll find the links to the report and the insights and the documentary. And as I said previously, we're really happy to hear reactions to the work, or very happy to hear from people who were either involved or would like to know more about it. Thanks very much.
Thanks so much, Alison. That's fantastic. It's fantastic to see the very rich key findings arising out of the Next Step project even. I'm just going to go back briefly to our last segment on micro-credentials, because I do see there are at least 2 questions in the chat. So while we are hopelessly behind time, I think it's worth just having a couple of minutes more on the topic. I see a question from Gavin Clinch to Lynn, asking about the thinking behind not including level 6 on the NFQ in the project.
Thanks, Mairead. I saw a couple of questions. There's one from Gavin and one from Michael Hannon as well in GMIT, so I might pick them both up if that's okay. Very interesting question. So I suppose the first thing is that we are in pilot phase, and I suppose when we were scoping out the initial pilot, we wanted to do 2 things: to align the university's strengths and expertise to the enterprise demand. And we knew there was really strong demand from a study we had done, but also looking at the data for particularly high-end skills. So particular focus, as we said, on people who are in employment, reskilling and upskilling. And the bulk of our work is at the level 9 area in the pilot phase. So we have some work at level 8 and some work at level 7. But as we're responding to the demand and seeing where the expertise lies in the university, a lot of it is around in this initial phase, level 9. Level 6 wouldn't be an area where there's some university work within those 7 partners at level 6, but not a huge amount of work at level 6 within these 7 university partners. So that's why we've gone that way in the pilot phase. It's really a response to the enterprise demand and also a response to the university expertise. And then in relation to Michael's question, which I think is really interesting and insightful, and obviously him sitting in registry, that would be really a real genuine concern. And I suppose part of the answer is the same point again: enterprise actively are looking for smaller units of learning, flexible units of learning. So one of our university partners, in fact, their modules are aligned at 3 and 6 ECTS. So they already work below level 5, but it really is a direct response to what enterprise is saying to us. So there's at least one of our partners actively looking at a 2.5 ECTS in response to a particular enterprise demand. So I think that's the answer to the why of it. But Michael's absolutely right. It does pose a number of challenges within the student record system to track and follow what's going on there. So we have that steering group that I talked about, that senior technical steering group. So not alone are we working with them through the discovery portal, but part of those conversations are how well placed are the systems to deal with these smaller credits. So those are very active conversations through the registrars group, through our senior technical group, and through the quality group in terms of tracking and maintaining. So it is challenging, but I think work ongoing in that area, Mairead. Thanks.
Brilliant, thanks a million. And I see a comment from Gavin that perhaps the technological universities might have a greater focus on level 6 micro-credentials.
Absolutely, that makes absolute sense. Yeah.
Perfect.
Thanks, Mairead.
Thanks so much, Lynn. So we will move on behind time as we are. And thank you to all of our speakers so far. I'm going to ask Karina Maguire to step in now with a conversation starter on professional and academic education. So looking at core functions and discrete responsibilities and where there is overlap. And this is a view really to gauging interest in this area for further discussion and research.
Okay, thanks, Mairead, and thank you so much for the presentations on the micro-credentials work. Sorry about cutting you off there, Mary. If you want to come back in before I start, maybe with any kind of a final comment, because we did race you off the screen there. I'm conscious you didn't get a chance to sum up. If you want another chance.
Just to say that we are concluding the pilot now, in collaboration with our colleagues in QI and the ETBs. We will be concluding it around Easter next year or before, hopefully, and then we will be developing a framework for the further education training sector based on the learning from the whole process.
Okay, that's great. Thank you so much, Mary. And we do know that your project and Lynn's project have been talking to each other, which is fantastic to know, because there's really rich learning in both of those. Okay, so this piece is actually quite short, and I suppose what we're trying to do here is we're trying to continue on our theme of kind of finding that common ground for our HEIs and our PSRBs. So to date, most of the reports that we have focused on have been around, I suppose, the professional accreditation. So it's a lot which is around program activity. So if you remember, we started off with our PARN report, which was kind of a landscape report back in 2017, trying to understand the level of professional accreditation and other activities in the higher education system. Then after that, we looked at the actual approval of the higher education programs themselves by professional bodies. So looking at differences between the approval processes and the various kind of standards bodies and regulatory bodies associated with professional accreditation. So that again was another kind of an insight. And I suppose the next one we tackled then was to look at the types of reports and the information that was being produced by those professional accreditation bodies, and we did look at reports across the system. So I suppose what we're trying to do now is perhaps because that focus is on programs, and Peter Cullen described earlier a project that we have in mind maybe for focusing on the program in our anniversary program, but we thought we might broaden out some of the characteristics and similarities that I suppose we have in terms of the roles of professional bodies and the roles of the HEIs, and maybe commence a study that would actually, I suppose, look at the more broader operation context. So we have our principles for professional engagement, and we're actually thrilled to be able to report that there is significant sign up to those principles. People are continuing to sign up to those, so we'd encourage you to link into your international bodies that you work closely with, particularly the PSRBs that are in the meeting. But I suppose really what we want to do then is to kind of carry the momentum and the positive engagement around those principles maybe to a wider study. So maybe if we just have a look at the next slide and try and see what we're trying to do there. So these are just some suggestions, but again, it's to try and broaden out our understanding of the roles that these different types of institutions play. Obviously, our higher education institutions and our professional bodies play a really critically important role in society, and also already work quite closely in partnership. And I suppose some of the discussions that we've been having are all around the formation of the prospective practitioners in each of the professional areas, and also really, what is required for those practitioners to kind of reach the standards and thresholds and to maintain that kind of competence going forward. So what we thought we might look at then is to broaden out a study of looking at the kind of common areas, any kind of similarities or differences on things like core functions of HEIs and professional bodies, particularly any kind of statutory responsibilities. Looking at things like the strategies that are articulated, missions and values, things around, I suppose, governance and overlap of staff. So there is quite a lot of overlap of staff and governance when it comes to professional body regulatory standards committees and those working in HEIs, and that's actually an interesting perspective. And again, some of these areas, these are just examples or suggestions of areas that we will look at. We did find ourselves that working with professional bodies and HEIs during COVID, that our understanding of quite a number of these areas was actually quite important to actually coming to some sort of conclusion where we were stuck on placements and things like that, and that we were able to understand the perspectives of the HEIs and the professional bodies much more when we delved into some of these areas. So again, some of those are accountability issues, and there's a lot of them for national and international. And again, the wider operating environment, I suppose there's many characteristics in the operating environment that we don't get to articulate in any of these reports that we've looked at to date. Research interests, general responsibilities, even business models. Again, the types of programs that are of interest to professional accreditation, and then of course those that are outside the remit of the professional accreditation purview as such, and how are they perceived and what happens then. So these are just, again, suggestions. As I said, there's a kind of a long list of them, but we'd be happy to kind of formulate something and send it out, and perhaps then initiate a wider study. Now, obviously that study will take into consideration what we have taken on board so far in terms of other publications and reports that we've produced, but it'll also look at what's happening internationally. There's quite a lot of activity internationally between professional bodies and HEIs. We're looking at our colleagues in the UK. They also have a professional body forum with their own HEIs, and even just local studies. So the Next Steps project that Alison has just gone through there had one of the fellowships. The piece of work there was around the formation of the professional person, and that's Professor Chris Lynch from UCC. So there's an awful lot of study in this area. There's a lot to take from. And there are a lot more international comparatives that are going on, smaller pieces of work that we could actually include in this. And of course, we would welcome HEIs and professional regulatory and standard body, feedback from all of you in that regard, any kind of areas that you think would be worthwhile. But before we actually launch this or even progress any further, Mairead's just going to do a little poll there to see if there is interest in this, and if there is, we'll come back to you. If not, we will come back to you. Either way, we will be back to you to see what our next steps are in finding that kind of common ground. So if you want to if you can roll that very straightforward poll, that would be great, Mairead, and then we can move on to our placement.
Just encourage people. I've shared a link and a QR code in the chat. So if you can follow that link, you'll be able to vote in the poll. So it would be great if you could give us your views. We have another poll just to gather areas that would be of interest. So if there are particular areas, I'm going to just stick that particular link into the poll, into the chat now. And we'll come back to that poll shortly. So a second link on particular topics that you would like to see covered. Okay. And we'll just quickly revisit both of those polls before we move on. Apologies, slight case of technical challenges here. So here is our original poll. So it's looking quite good. And we'll continue to monitor that poll, and we'll share results with you after this session. I'm just going to move back to our other poll to see if there's any feedback here just yet. There's not. We'll keep that open, and we will come back to you, as Karina said, with any ideas that we receive for your thoughts after this session. The second link is taking you to the same poll. Okay, that's not very helpful. Possibly the best idea then is if you can add any ideas into the chat. That's probably the better idea, because I may not be able to solve that problem just right now. So thanks for letting me know. Okay, so I think that takes us then to our panel discussion on placements and work-based learning. Unfortunately, we don't have our Australian colleagues joining us, and we don't have our original moderator, but my colleague, Dr. Brian Maguire, has very kindly stepped into the breach. So I will hand over to Brian to talk to our panelists, Bronwyn Maloney, Ronan O'Loughlin, Carolyn Donoghue, on work-based learning and placements, and what we've learned from the pandemic. Thanks, Brian.
Thanks, Mairead, and thanks, colleagues, and welcome for staying with us. You know, Johnny Mitchell said you don't know what you missed till it's gone. And during the pandemic, one of the things that was gone was some of our placement opportunities. So we wanted to do a quick round of the experience, on the one hand, of a higher education institution, but on the other hand, of the response from the professional bodies. So we kick off with Bronwyn Maloney from UCD, the Director of Quality there. Bronwyn, what top level messages would you have from UCD's experience of placements during the pandemic?
I think the collegiality, and the sharing of learning across the institution, both at faculty, professional, and all staff, the collaboration, I think, between the HEIs in terms of both learning and so on. I would certainly see, in terms of having to flex and adjust, we had to be more flexible, agile in terms of how we deliver teaching and learning. And certainly the use of our teaching and learning unit and our educational technologists were particularly critical in this area.
Thanks, that's great. We'll come back to the university experience later on, maybe. But I'd like to bring in Ronan O'Loughlin now, from the Director of Education and Training and Chartered Accountant Ireland. Ronan, what issues arose in your experience of the accountancy profession during this time?
Well, we would, as an institute, have about nearly 2,000 students joining us each year. And I think the students of 2020 faced a significant challenge. They would have not had the normal onboarding. In fact, the last year probably in university would have been disrupted by the pandemic. They had a virtual onboarding into their firms. They had a virtual education program, which we delivered, and all virtual assessments. Their work experience, in many cases, would have not involved the normal face-to-face client work that they would have done. It's all done electronically. So they were facing significant challenges for what we can see. So the response then is, how do you support that? Obviously, we were in new ground. We've had to take on board additional supports to our students in terms of trying to help deal with mental health challenges, the isolation, the lack of colleagues around in the normal supervision that you'd have, role modeling, and helping people on their journey. So lots of things, and indeed, even at an informal level, one of the HR directors was highlighting to me, you know, the normal conversation that would happen peer to peer in the workplace isn't happening in the normal way. So to me, the pandemic, as was already said, is something we probably all anticipated would be a few months and would be coming out the other end. It has been a long journey, and we're very much learning as we go. We've identified a number of issues, but we wouldn't say we've cracked it. Interestingly, one firm was talking to me about, you know, normally you'll be working with colleagues, so to try to deal with that, they would have a Teams meeting running in the background. So somebody is there if you want to talk to them, and they both are working away. And firms are doing that to try to support it, but it is not the same as being in the same room or being able to walk over to the water cooler and have a chat about issues as you would normally do. So it's a different world with different challenges.
Thanks, Ronan. You know, I think that's a very interesting point there. On the one hand, you know, the priority was very often put during the pandemic in trying to ensure that the discrete professional competences that are achieved in placements were actually achieved. But you've drawn attention there to the sort of wider socialization, professional socialization, that's also part of the work-based learning elements of many occupations. And it also poses a particular question for how you quality assure that. How do you ensure that people have a good socialization experience? You can test whether they have discrete skill sets that are required in the workplace, but the softer stuff is even more challenging. Listen, if the accountancy trainees had challenges during COVID, the nursing trainees had an even bigger one. So our next contributor is Carolyn Donoghue, the Director of Education Policy and Standards from the Nursing and Midwifery Board of Ireland. Carolyn, where do you start?
Yeah, good question. I think for us, the biggest challenge was safety, because our nursing students undergo a program that is 50% academic and 50% clinical placement. So in order to progress, they need to achieve a lot of competencies within clinical placements every single year. So their clinical placements became unattainable because of pure health and safety reasons. So they were sent on a Friday. We're told on Monday you can't go to your placement, and we don't know when you'll ever get back because of the safety issues. COVID wards were popping up left, right, and centre. Their preceptors, which are their supervisors within the placement areas, were off with COVID and COVID-related contacts. So there were all of a sudden nobody was there to supervise the students. The wards, they wanted to reduce activity, reduce exposure, so therefore the last person to be let in the door is a student. So a national decision was taken that actually all students had to leave the clinical area, the supernumerary students, but then we also left the intern students, which are the fourth years, in the clinical area dealing with COVID because they're part of the workforce. So you had two strands of students on two very different journeys. So we established as a regulator a national oversight committee. And as you say, from listening to the earlier talks, it's that leadership piece, it's the collaboration piece and the inclusion. And I think that's how we all got through, because we had representatives from our higher education institutions, we had the Department of Health, we had CPCs who are the supervisors of the students, the directors of nursing from different areas, included them all within an oversight group on a week-by-week basis to look at what was the level of COVID within the areas and what was the health and safety piece. And then looking at alternative placements. And that's where actually some things that can be difficult can be turned into a positive. Within the vaccination centres, then our students became some of the key people in order to provide vaccinations within a safe environment with training. And so then they became part of the solution. So, you know, I think it's one of those things you have to think on your feet a lot. And I think it was through those oversight groups that a lot of the good solutions came forward.
Great, thank you. And can I ask, they obviously help to address the acute problems, if you like, of the current, recent and current ongoing phase of COVID. Are there lessons there about how placements might be organised in the future, or because it sounds like, you know, for nursing and indeed for other professions, there's more flexibility in terms of what's counted as, you know, a mandatory set of placements and so on. Is that being fed forward into changes in regulatory procedures or changes in curricula?
Yeah, I know, absolutely. I think what we've seen is that, you know, we've run based on a very traditional model heretofore, and, you know, in individual pockets, people have been quite innovative and have come to us on a case-by-case basis, looking at different opportunities for placements. But I think COVID expedited that. And then at a national level, every single HEI was looking at what are the other opportunities. So we can't go into the traditional areas, but there is good learning to be had in other sectors and with other professionals. So we have been much more lenient in the approach. And if we have a safety piece, which is called the Clinical Learning Environment Audit. and the HEI undertakes that with the clinical partners. So if they undertake the audit and look at ways that students can achieve learning outcomes, we'll go with it. You know, and I'd say that flexibility seems to have worked an awful lot, and a lot of the students and the HEIs have said that there's actually a greater diversity to the learning that's happening now.
Great, thanks, Caroline. If I can cycle back again to Bronwyn for the institutional perspective, you know, that flexibility that Caroline talked about and that adaptability to the changing circumstances that Ronan referred to, that also obviously happened within the institutions. But from a quality officer's point of view, flexibility isn't always the most welcome phrase, because it means diversity, it means divergences, it means something that you have to keep track of, and especially when you're keeping a track across such a wide range of professions and placement activities. Is there anything sort of general arising from the way in which the university, or your university in particular, is approaching placements as a result of the flexibilities we've seen?
From UCD's perspective, we don't have a formal map of programs with placements or work-based elements at the institution level. It's really determined on the basis of majors with placement and work-based modules linked to them. That's managed at both the institutional level and also at the local level at either the program or the school. Our curriculum would be reviewed annually, and that would be in terms of looking at the learning outcomes for both majors and modules. So therefore, obviously, there would have been adjustment around the variance during COVID and that. I can actually give you a case study or an example, I suppose, of where learning outcomes and professional competencies were addressed or were looked at. And that would be in our School of Public Health, Physiotherapy and Health and Sports Science in our physiotherapy department. And it was where there were no placements available, and we had to put in a telehealth placement for students just to ensure that the students were able to obviously complete their stage or their program. And what this particular module or placement did was provided education in the technology and best practice in telehealth, digital healthcare, which included risk management, scope of practice, privacy and data protection. And this was done with remote learning with either real patients under the care of some of our clinical partners. So obviously we would work with them to develop that, and then those who consented to have consultations or treatment sessions recorded or streamed, or else simulated patients were recruited with the appropriate consent. Obviously, this was very labour intensive for the school, which obviously was a challenge. But what it did was it allowed a large number of students to get observational experience in patient assessment and demonstrations and treatments, which they were able then to devise treatments, plans and progressions for patients and for the programme. That was introduced in 2020, and we obviously repeated this in 2021 and moved it out and spread it out further across the various different stages. I think the potential for this kind of modular placement is something that was particularly useful for the students, and it's something that we intend to take forward. I suppose going back to the quality that you mentioned, Brian, I suppose at the end of it, it is very important as part of that in terms of the discussions that would have been held with our professional bodies, obviously within the university, ensuring that the learning outcomes were met and the assessments were adjusted to meet that as well. And obviously going forward, we look to standardise that virtual placement content and ensure that the digital learning resources are both planned and address that.
Thanks, Bram. That's a great concrete example. I'm sure we could go on with more examples from around the disciplines, but our time is running out. You did talk there about some of the challenges of working in the digital environment and digital placements. Laura has put a link there in the chat to a report we've just done on another aspect of the digital learning, which is the e-proctoring. I know that it's something that has been of great interest to including to the accountancy profession. So that's a report, and there's a video presentation on that available as well. So it does. We're just still gleaning really some of the learning from this experience. Some of the professional bodies have in fact published guidelines about how they're adapting. I draw attention, particularly one that caught our eye over the summer was the work done by Coru, and they have a guidance on for the educators on the design and quality assurance of the placements. One of the reasons why it has some more general interest is that, of course, Coru is a multi-professional regulator, and so they have it's a bit more generic than the guidelines that have been produced by some of the individual professions. So detailing approaches to placement planning, what needs to be done prior to placement, happens during placement, post-placement. So it's just an interesting conceptual model that both the professions and indeed the higher education quality side might want to have a look at. I'll put a link to it maybe in the chat. Our time is up, and I'm not sure, Mairead, did you want me to wrap up, or do you have something else to wrap up?
I have a couple of things to add.
Right. Okay. So yeah, I just then thank the panel members, Ronan, Carolyn, and Bronwyn, and sorry we didn't have more time to open up these topics.
Thanks so much, Brian, and thank you so much to all of the panelists as well for giving your perspective. I suppose there's just a couple of things that remain. Some of you, and thank you very much to Paul O'Leary for pointing out how to correctly access the second survey. So I just want to quickly present what's come through on that particular poll. So I'm just going to present that quickly. So you can see here a variety of comments, actually quite a few comments. We might PDF this and share this with you, but I'll pick out a few. So I see governance and staff overlap, accreditation and approval criteria. So these are areas for further research into 2022 as part of this program infrastructure and HEIs, including QA. I see the Irish Register of Qualifications coming up there. Types of programs of interest in those outside this remit, accreditation or approval criteria, program infrastructure and HEIs and QA placements in HEIs, links to professional bodies, accreditation standards, ensuring recognition internationally. So there's an awful lot there to digest. So I will share that with you. And I see there are also very positive responses to the question as to whether this area is one that you feel merits further exploration. We've got 42 yes and 6 no. So good to see that the yes is outweighing the no there. I know Brian has already mentioned it, but I just want to draw your attention once more to our recent report on e-proctoring. Laura has put the link in the chat, and you'll also access the recording to a talk by Professor Paul Giller, who completed this report on behalf of QQI at that link. So we very much welcome your thoughts or any questions that you have on that. We would also like to hear your thoughts on what we should do with this programme going into 2022 and beyond. We really welcome your feedback as part of 2 surveys, one for professional bodies and one for HEIs. I've stuck those links into the chat. So we'd really like to hear what you would like to hear about in these kinds of events going forward, what kind of reports or reflections you would like to see. We have built considerable momentum with this programme during 2020 with the accreditation principles, and thank you to all of you who have signed up to those principles. We are really finding common ground I don't know whether that's a pun or what kind of wordplay that is, but we would like to build on that momentum in 2022. And as Karina has said, the accreditation principles are still open for you to sign up to. And if you haven't already done so, we would really welcome that. So I think that's about it. Thank you so much to all of our speakers who spoke today. Mary Lyons from Solace, Dr. Lynn Ramsey from the IUA. We had Dr. Klaus Weil from Professions Australia, and to our panelists, Bronwyn Maloney, Carolyn Donoghue and Ronan O'Loughlin. and to Brian Maguire for stepping into the breach to chair that panel as well. And thank you also to Alison Farrell, Dr. Alison Farrell from the National Forum. I'm not sure whether there's anything else to be said, colleagues, if you want to jump in there with anything further I've forgotten. Otherwise, I'll draw this event to a close, and thank you so much for coming along.